everyone. Welcome to the Self-Awareness Journey podcast. I'm Melissa Albers.
And I'm JJ Parker. This podcast is for seekers, seekers of happiness and joy, seekers of a centered approach to success in life, seekers of their true, authentic selves.
Get ready for some real talk on everything from anxiety, emotions, and habits to love, compassion, and forgiveness. We know you'll be challenged and enlightened by this conversation. We're so glad you're here. Let's dive in.
Well, we have been doing the podcast for 207 episodes.
Isn't
Seems
that crazy?
We were like, oh, you know what? We should do like a fun 200th episode and kind of like celebrate how, consistent we have been on this podcast. And then we totally blew past it. We totally forgot.
I know. We've been doing that. Yeah, I know. It's crazy.
So what I think is super interesting about like our little podcast journey here is we set off like, a couple years ago, right? You and I were having coffee and we're waxing poetic about how the universe works. Yeah.
Like we do.
And we're kind of trying to figure out like, what's the next thing we do together? Mm-hmm. And we're just like, well, let's just record some of this and see what happens.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened.
Just record.
Well, we also had some scribbly notes in there too. Don't forget, we each had a little
something
sort of
on a napkin.
Yes.
But
and I just did the quick math while you were saying that, and it is 3.9 years now. That's how many episodes we've recorded.
Oh, wow.
3.9 years. Yes, almost 4 years.
Because we release once a week. Almost 4 years.
That's
crazy.
It is. We do. We release once a week. We have not missed a single week.
Good
not
for us.
One.
This episode
knocking on wood.
How awesome we are. Well, do you remember like the first couple episodes? How like awkward they were and how hard they were not very good.
Yeah.
Like the thing I didn't like about them is like technically they were really bad. Like they didn't sound good. They were echoey. Like
oh my
the
gosh.
microphones were bad. Like I don't know.
Well, yeah, actually that's true. We had some really bad recordings.
Your internet was so bad that there was times where you would go park your car at a coffee shop that had Wi-Fi
front.
and record it from the front seat of your car with your AirPods.
And yes, exactly. Oh my gosh. And a laptop balanced on a dash that was too close to the windshield so it would never open completely.
Yeah.
And people would walk by me like, is this woman like doing something bad? Because who sits in there? Yeah, because I wasn't even typing. I was on the computer, but I forgot about that. You know what else is like, I remember the beginning when we first started, I always was like really excited because I'm a teacher, I teach in sessions and seminars and that sort of thing. And I would get into this mode where it was like, oh, here's a platform I'm supposed to teach.
Mm-hmm.
And it was subconscious. And it wasn't because I thought I was cool or better or, or anything. It was just a habitual way of thinking about something. Mm-hmm. And I remember you saying, no, we just want to talk about this.
Yeah.
And then through our mutual experiences, we will be teaching things, we will be bringing up ideas, but it doesn't have to be so formal. And I remember thinking, obviously that's true. But I remember absolutely not knowing how to make that mental shift. Mm-hmm. I remember that very clearly.
Now, fast forward 200 more episodes and
207.
Look at how smooth everything goes. Actually, it's not that much better. It's slightly better. You got faster internet. We got better microphones.
I still get real squirrely in the head and not know where I'm going, what direction is up. That part is exactly the same. And every once in a while, technical glitches that, frustrate some people on this pod more than others.
I've also had the opportunity the past couple months to be a guest on some other people's podcasts for work.
Yeah.
And what was really fun about that experience is I was invited and then we did the recording just like you and I do the recording. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh, this is nothing. This is the thing I do every single week. So
exactly.
I was super comfortable with it. I was able to riff really well and easily with the other podcast hosts.
Oh, and that's interesting.
I just was thinking like, wow, I am fairly well practiced at this activity.
Yes. Oh, well said. I love that. That's so true. And you know, being more practiced as you are, it does allow you to bypass the tactical things that you are doing in the moment so that you can focus on the real thing.
Yeah, right.
Important thing.
Sometimes when we're doing something like new or we're not super comfortable, it's like you get so much so far and so much in your head and you're just like spinning around in there and you actually can't think very well.
Oh my gosh. Can I give you an example?
Yeah.
Okay. So, you know, I think it was last week or the week before, we dropped a pod on hobbies and I was in a very manic mood about my sourdough bread making, right? How I've started this journey like a few months ago and just did this deep dive. And I mean, I regaled you with many stories of the technical aspects of sourdough baking and your eyes were rolling in the back of your head, but you're trying to be very patient with me. All right.
This.
Here's the funny thing though. One of my besties, she calls me, she just moved out of state and she says, hey, I think I'm going to try sourdough. Okay, this is totally random. And so for the last 3 or 4 days, she has been texting me. And, you know, I'm not typically a high detail person. The texts I've been sending her back with all of this information that I've learned is like paragraph after paragraph after paragraph. And she knows me so well. She's like, the level of detail that you are coming at this with is crazy. And I realized, though, that at the beginning of her journey, because she's probably 4 months behind me, so not very much, right? How much more comfortable I am now because I've been in the practice of this sourdough, right?
Yeah.
She said, you could teach a class. And I was like, absolutely not. I am such a novice, you know? But isn't that funny? From her perspective, just a little bit of practice changes everything.
You could have a sourdough podcast. Call it like the Sour Pod.
Sour Pod. I'm going to add that to your business list.
Well,
side note, everybody, I have a JJ Business Ideas running notes that I had for, I don't know, 8 years. It's
filled with crackpot ideas. So in the like this, we talk about this stuff a lot. We talk about habits, and we talk about habitual thinking.
Yes,
and we talk about like routines.
Yep.
And we do talk about like sort of like work stuff and goals, but this idea of practice is kind of interesting.
Yes,
because like where else? Okay, so like my kids go to like soccer practice, right? My doctor has a medical practice.
Actually, I'm very uncomfortable with that phrase.
All of a sudden. That's why, exactly. That's why I love
all of a sudden.
That's why I love the juxtaposition of that, right? Why is it?
I don't like that.
Why do we call like children's sports things going to practice, and then why do we also call like life or death situations also in practice?
Well, maybe that's just one place where they misput the word.
Maybe.
And it doesn't actually belong in that example. Well, but you know what? Like, how about yoga practice, though? You know, I mean, I've done yoga for...
They call yoga a practice.
And they call it a practice because you're always improving every time you're, you know, and so that you're always in the flow. You're never getting it done.
So some of that language is interesting, right? Because we'll use things like practice makes perfect.
Yeah, that's right.
So this like idea that like we have to routinely work on something in order to get better at it.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and think about when you're little, the number of times, like if you played a musical instrument, you had to practice. Like that was everybody hated that.
Oh, you had to practice. Yeah. I had to practice the trumpet. It was terrible.
You played the trumpet?
Oh, for like a minute. For the Bloomington Public Schools minimum requirement for music.
I played a flute. And the reason I chose the flute is they said you can choose whatever instrument that you want, but you have to carry it to and from band every day.
Yeah.
And you have to show an interest in otherwise, if we think you're just choosing it because you're not interested. So I was all in. So I chose the flute. And the reason I chose the flute is because I had to walk to school 3 blocks. And I just thought a tuba is way too much.
What's the lightest instrument possible?
Exactly. And you couldn't do piccolo till after you had the flute for a long time. But yeah, so even then we get in this idea of practicing when we're younger.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's I don't know, it's like a learning thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But it's like a little bit more, to me, like that word practice is like more like applied learning. Like I can learn something out of a book, but then in order to actually do it, like I would say another thing, like I kind of practice outdoors is like going to the boundary waters to me. Like the first time I did it was like kind of a mess. It didn't, we forgot a bunch of stuff. Right. And the second time it was all like a little smoother. And now by like the 10th time now, it's just like I got the whole flow down. I know what to expect and everything works, totally pretty well.
Yeah. I remember the first time that you went to the boundary waters. You guys actually flipped the canoe.
Oh, yeah. We flipped a canoe. We lost a canoe paddle.
You dropped a phone into the water.
Yeah, I wrecked my camera.
It was great. It was a shit show, actually. Pardon my swearing. And yet you still went back and kept practicing.
More practice.
Okay. So this is like spurring something. I just remembered something. So I was on the gram, as you do once in a while, even though we talk about how bad it is. I
don't think scrolling Instagram is practicing anything.
No, but I want to tell you, I think it's interesting, like the things that I follow. So the things that I follow on Instagram, which, whatever you follow, expands exponentially. So I follow dogs, I follow funny dancing, and I follow like people that are into positive attitude, teaching, that sort of thing.
I just got this great visual of that's what it looks like in your brain.
It is exactly that. It like is a golden retriever wearing a chef hat, standing at the counter, chopping vegetables. That's exactly what I get. And then I laugh and I laugh. I also follow Tiny Chef, which is my new all-time favorite, but that's beside the point. Okay, here's the thing I wanted to mention. So this man, I don't know who he is, and it was like one of the you should follow kind of suggestions that they give you based on your viewing habits. And it was just this very little blip. And this is what he said. And I just remembered it now. It said, we get good at what we practice. Okay. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. And he paused. And then he said, so be very careful about what you think. Because your thinking is also practicing. Right. And I was like, oh, wow. That's impactful, right? That was very impactful because then I immediately stopped listening. I wasn't aware that I was doing this, by the way, but in reflection, this is exactly what I did. I heard that we get good at what we practice. So be careful of what you think because your thoughts are also what you're practicing, right? I was like, oh, so that's interesting. What kind of thoughts do I practice that I really like? That's where I went. And then I also did a reflection on what kind of thoughts do I have that I practice all the time that I really don't like.
Yeah. Well, that's a really interesting way to phrase it because not even probably too long ago, we talked about like habitual thinking. Like thinking that just kind of got grooved in for some reason, and then you just kind of keep going back to it, and it just kind of reinforces itself. So it's habitual thinking.
Yeah.
To me, that sounds almost like a reactive state. Like something happened, and then it just again like the groove got put in there,
just
and
kept
it got
playing
deeper
it out
and
over and
over.
Exactly.
Kind of like without much, without much purpose, or like you didn't proactively decide like I'm going to form this new habit. The new habit just sort of formed
this
you idea this idea that we are going to try to practice thinking seems much more proactive. Like I'm going to decide that I'm going to start thinking in a different way, and I'm going to work on that by doing some simple things, doing like an easy thing first or a small thing first. I'm going to try to build that up over time, because when we start something new, like just like this podcast, like our first ones were terrible. It took
They
us a
weren't
while.
terrible. They were not great, but they weren't terrible.
But you know what I mean? Like it took a while to build it. And so what you're saying is we can do that same thing with our thinking patterns or possibly even with our emotional responses.
Yeah. So let me give you an example, like how this plays out. Like just yesterday, I was having a coaching call with just this great client of mine, newly minted president, probably within the last 2.5 years. Okay, 3 years. And we were talking about how this president develops their team, their executive team, how they think about making corrections when they see someone on their team not doing something well. Okay. And then, when you're new in presidency, it's just so much pressure to always make the right decisions and always, like don't infringe on other people's decision making, or how much should you infringe on other people's decision making. I mean, it's pretty complicated, I think, when you're trying to sort it all out. But we hit this really interesting idea of the practiced way that this president had always given feedback to his people was by way of a performance, like coaching by performance. In other words, do this exact thing so that you get this exact outcome. Or if your group is responsible for this, then you have to make sure these things happen, right? So very specifically targeted at performance of something. Okay, but the way to start practicing more longevity in a coaching relationship with others is to have it be development-based instead of performance-based. So I don't mean to go deep into work stuff, but the difference would be this. It's like, if you feel kind of bad about giving feedback to somebody because habitually you feel like the only time you've ever ever had to give somebody feedback is if you needed to correct them in some way, right? This could even be with your children as they get older, or this could even be like your interactions with your spouse or people that you love. If you're used to only having the courage to give them feedback when something needs to be corrected, this is what you've practiced. Okay, so then as you develop, as they develop, or your relationship is developing, now that doesn't really feel right, but there's still opportunities for giving feedback, for giving coaching, and it's actually like a developmental opportunity now. So in other words, it's like it doesn't correct them, it plus ones them in a way, if that makes sense. And I think that's like, those are the kinds of things that we practice all the time in our jobs. We do several things all the time in relationship with other people that we don't even really think about. It's just been so practiced for us that we don't even consider if it's time to move up and out of that and try something else. Yeah. So it doesn't have to be some habit. It doesn't have to be like, I'm going to be new. It could just simply be, this is really interesting. Like, we formed this relationship. And I mean, so even if you look at like you and I, look at how much our relationship has morphed in 10 years. How we would practice these ways of trying to talk to each other, like when we were in our startup, like how do we have this difficult conversation with each other? And we trusted each other and we built off of this trust. But now it's even so different, right? Like if we're going to talk to each other about big stuff, we just practice a completely different way. And how did that happen?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing to me that's interesting to think about.
Well, I guess I had not really ever considered this idea that if I'm only in that feedback way, if I'm only giving negative feedback to somebody or corrective feedback, then it's really hard for me to give them positive feedback. Or if I do, I actually feel weird about it because I'm used to giving them negative feedback.
Yeah. Well, and even not negative, because you might not be giving them feedback to make it, you might be considering it negative, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's simply to keep their performance at the peak that you think that they're capable of doing. And it's uncomfortable. Let's say uncomfortable instead of negative.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point. The other thing that made me think of is like, changing relationships over time. Like there's a point where you've got a very maybe direct parent-child relationship with their kids. But then as they get older, it becomes a little different, right?
Yeah.
It's more like maybe it's more like a peer relationship or
a partnership.
Yeah. So there's another change and practicing maybe what that new relationship looks like as they get older. It's got to be pretty interesting.
So if you have a skill that you've got honed to a very fine point, like a sourdough loaf, say for instance. Okay, I really don't, not yet, but I'm getting there. Okay, and you got there by a certain way, and now it requires you to shift something up. How easy is it to go back to your old way, even when you're in the practice? Oh my gosh. So you think of a kid that's in their 20s, right? Because I've got 20-somethings. You don't yet. You're right behind me.
Yep.
And with a 20-something, you parent them in such a different way. But I'll tell you something, when that 20-something does something really stupid, because they're young and they're 20-something, and you're so much wiser, right? Air quotes. Yeah. You want to course correct them the way you did when they were little, because that's what you practiced and that's what you're used to. And if you continue to practice that same thing, it doesn't go well, right? So there it is. It's like you get good at what you practice.
Yeah. Yep.
Be careful of what your thoughts are. What are you practicing that you may not even be aware of?
Yeah, and it affects you a lot, right? The other week I was like in my kitchen doing the dishes, like we talked about so many times.
You practice that a lot. You're good at that. I bet you're so good at that.
Dr. Seuss stack of dirty dishes. And I guess like every day it's crazy. I don't understand how it happened. But I found myself like yet again getting irritated about the dishes. And I was like, you know what? I am going to take this moment and this opportunity to actually just be grateful that I have dishes to put away, that I have a family that has created this mess, right? Like I just really tried to switch that. So I've been practicing on that more emotional level. It's like, okay, every time I notice I'm getting irritated, let me just practice being thankful instead of being irritated. And it takes like a lot of reps. It's surprising how
it does take a lot of reps.
Because still my initial reaction, even this morning when there was more dishes, I'm like, how did the dishes accumulate overnight while everyone was sleeping? Apparently,
teenagers that get up in the night. Like teenagers that get up in the night, sneak down to the kitchen and go, "Okay, Dr. Seuss this again." That is a very funny visual.
Are very practiced at balancing dirty dishes.
Oh my God.
We'll say that. But there's like all these opportunities to actually practice. I like the idea. I like the wording of that we're practicing. We might be practicing our hobbies, right? Like
which is more intentional, and you're more aware of that.
Yeah, and it's easy. Like I go practice tennis all the time. I go practice rock climbing. I go practice these hobbies. I do practice at work, even though we don't call it that. I would really rather a lot of work activities be called practice, because the nice thing about calling something a practice is kind of admitting like it's not going to be perfect. We're going to get better over time, but we routinely show up and work on the skills and try to get better at them.
Right.
Because that's more realistic to my expectation of what work is.
Well, that's being a human being, though.
Reality,
I had a coach.
Right.
Yeah, I had a coach who always said, being a human, you're always changing. You're never, ever the same. And if you're never, ever the same, you're never perfect, because you're not done yet, and you're never done. There's always further to go. And that plays right into your way, where it's like, even if, like something practical, like what if one of the thoughts that you catch yourself thinking is, I'm not going to have enough to pay my bills this month. And you actually are, but you have this habitual way of thinking that there will be constriction, or there won't be enough, or something will happen that you can't control. And you consistently beat the drum of there's not going to be enough. So even though you do have enough each week to week to week to week, the feeling and the things that you're creating with those kinds of thoughts are not helpful at all, right? And those are the kind of insidious things, I think, that kind of pick away at us, pick away at our spirit when no one else is looking, including us ourselves. And to me, that's really where the self-awareness journey comes back to play. How you and I are always talking about checking with your feelings. Like, there's a lot of stuff that you're probably thinking about that you've practiced a lot.
Yeah.
That don't feel good. And so you're using your own thoughts to make you feel bad, and it's like, wow, practice what you get good at what you practice. And when you say it like that, it's almost like, oh yeah, I don't want to be good at that.
I don't want to be good at self-deprecating and anxiety spirals. And
exactly. Yeah, exactly. That's just something interesting to think about.
Well, this is great. Like, I like this idea, like, and we're practicing being humans. Like, we can practice being humans all the time.
Yes, and interacting with other humans that are also practicing being humans.
Yep.
So give people a break.
Yep, they're just practicing.
See, that's another one. They're just practicing.
Did you enjoy this episode? Please go to your favorite podcast platform to subscribe, rate, and leave a review so others can discover it as well.
Growing self-awareness is a lifelong journey, and there's always further to go. And it's better when we're all in it together. Please think of someone you know who could benefit from hearing today's conversation and share this episode with them. We can't thank you enough for listening. Until next time, happy exploring, seekers.